This is a recording of a Pages of Hackney event that took place in the shop on Thursday the 27th of October 2022, when we welcomed Jessica Gaitán Johannesson and Yara Rodrigues Fowler here to discuss their books Nerves and Their Endings and There Are More Things, with Diyora Shadijanova chairing the conversation. Jessica Gaitán Johannesson grew up between Sweden, Colombia and Ecuador. She's a bookseller and an activist working for climate justice and lives in Edinburgh. Her first novel, How We Are Translated, was longlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize. Her new essay collection, The Nerves and Their Endings, Essays on Crisis and Response, published by Scribe, moves from the personal to political and back again, exploring how we respond to crises. Yara Rodrigues Fowler is from South London. Her first novel, Stubborn Archivist, was released in 2019 and nominated for several prizes, including the Dylan Thomas Prize and the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year award. Yara's second novel, There Are More Things, was shortlisted as a work in progress for the Eccles Centre and Hay Festival Writers Award 2019. Since its release in April 2022, There Are More Things has been shortlisted for the George Orwell Prize for Political Fiction. Yara is also a part-time climate justice organiser. The chair was Diyora Shadijanova, an award-winning multimedia journalist and writer. She is currently the climate editor of gal-dem magazine, and her work has appeared in The Guardian, Novara Media, Vice and many more exciting publications.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. I'm delighted to be here tonight with Yara and Jessica. For the next hour, we'll be discussing intersectional approaches to activism and how this theme crops up in both of our guest books, The Nerves and Their Endings, and There Are More Things. But before we get into the discussion between myself, Jessica, and Yara, and some readings from the authors, I want to introduce the topic of intersectional activism. I'm sure many of you have heard the term intersectionality, which refers to the acknowledgement that everyone in society has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression, and we must consider everything and anything that can marginalize people. Some examples of such oppression include sexism, racism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and so on. So when it comes to social and political activism, the goal of an intersectional approach would be to fight for and create a world where these oppressions are eliminated. As the climate editor of gal-dem magazine, I feel that both climate activism and climate coverage often overlooks the voices and experiences of marginalised groups, particularly those in the Global South, who have been living with the impact of the crisis for years. Through our reporting, we explore the effect of the climate crisis and campaign for change to address its effect on marginalised communities in the UK and around the world. A campaign I've actually worked on with Yara is the Stop the Silvertown Tunnel campaign here in East London. The tunnel spells an environmental disaster for some of the most marginalised communities living in East London. In Newham, air pollution is at some of the highest levels in the UK and already kills 96 people a year. The traffic from the Silvertown Tunnel will bring more pollution to an already deprived part of the city. Some parts of Newham are among the poorest in England, with half of the children in the borough living in poverty and 30% of local jobs not paying the London living wage. Locals aren't surprised that this project is taking place there. They say its construction is an example of environmental racism, of minority groups unequally bearing the brunt of pollution and environmental degradation. This story, of course, is not unique to Newham. It's replicated all over the world, where injustices are connected and the root of the problem is one of historical greed, exploitation, and resource hoarding. We see this now with the UK's energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, and the climate crisis. Sure, these issues are not only local to this country, but they could have been a lot less severe had the government revitalised and renationalised the energy sector. As someone who has frequently turned up to different political protests throughout the years and has always been passionate about the environment, I wonder if now is our opportunity to unite both class and climate justice in this country. Because when you dig a bit deeper, we all have the same goal: to live in dignity, to live in freedom, to live joyfully, to live in community, and to pass on a safe and better world to future generations. For me, an intersectional approach recognizes the variety of the human experience and brings people together. United and in solidarity, we're able to achieve so much more, as is evident in both Yara and Jessica's books. You don't need to applause me.
That was so beautiful. Thanks, Yara.
We can maybe start with a reading?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall I
Yeah, go
start?
for it,
Yeah,
Jessica.
is that what we decided?
Yes.
Thank you. That was such a wonderful introduction, and thank you for coming, everyone. It's really, really lovely to be here on this very hot October. So I thought I'd read, because we'll be discussing intersectionality and interconnectedness of activism, but also, I guess, of vulnerabilities and of privileges. I thought I'd read a part from the first essay in the book, and the kind of preamble to that, which is necessary to know, that is that it's an essay that starts with, so they're personal essays, so they draw a lot on personal experience, but kind of always trying to push out to what that says about a broader reality, and how that might help me understand somebody else, basically, or understand personal experience as part of a society and as part of an ecosystem of interconnectedness. So this essay starts with my experience of being hospitalized about 20 years ago now, with an eating disorder, and how many years later, when I had this, like, I guess, climate awakening, or just one of the moments where you go like, oh my God, this is happening, how that felt very familiar. So that's where that essay began. So this little bit here, it comes in after talking about the response to kind of the IPCC report of 2018 and the "we have 12 years left" headlines, which were problematic in themselves, but that's another story. So yes, it's been another couple of years now, countless more reevaluations. For as long as it doesn't physically crash over you, it always remains easier to look away from the horrors of environmental collapse. No matter the latest hurricane, as long as it's not in your city. Within this state of sleep, I've begun to call these sudden realizations my holy shit moments. Doug, a friend who's a psychotherapist and whom I met through our shared terror of what's coming, has a useful image. He describes the movement back and forth between engaging with the crisis and retreating to ordinary life as a misted mirror. Getting out of the shower, you wipe it, and there your face is, warts and all, the lips of someone who doesn't know what enough means. Soon the mist, which includes your own breath, covers it up again. But every time the mist is cleared, there's the possibility of something new emerging that wasn't there before. Except it isn't new at all. It only happens to be new to you. And there are no new pains. We have felt them already, writes Audre Lorde. My attempts at making sense of the climate crisis have changed and adjusted repeatedly. They continue to shift and to quake. Like so many, I began my response to global existential threat with a focus on raising the alarm, joining efforts to pressure the UK government to immediately reduce carbon emissions, alongside agonising about how we could see my dad and sister if we could no longer fly. The more time I spend with the nervous system of climate collapse, the more restrictive and counterproductive this stubborn focus on emissions, and individual emissions at that, appears. For 500 years, this has been a place of ruins. Brazilian journalist Eliane Broom, am I pronouncing that correctly? I just realized, writes about the Amazon. The fact that the Amazon is still regarded as something far away on the periphery of our vision shows just how stupid white Western culture is. The climate crisis is an illness of severed connections on a colossal and intimate scale. Those whose connections are thoroughly severed are also the least vulnerable and those with the most power. Disconnection is both cause and constant generator of mayhem. The Amazon, as Broom points out, is the real home of humanity, and it's been the stage of genocide and ecocide for centuries. Colonialism created the climate crisis. White supremacy is its language and logic. In the expansive nervous system of this world, white supremacy, patriarchy, and extractivism are faulty codes, the misfiring signals which disconnect me from what is in fact happening to me. They construct peripheries and thereby make ancient pain seem brand new. As half Colombian, the Amazon makes up 40% of Colombia's landmass. The country's history is one written in the blood of European and later US imperialism. As a brown person, I didn't see systemic racism as equally urgent when I became climate scared out of my mind. Those weren't the signals fired. The first time I heard the term slow violence was during a talk delivered by a fellow activist and university lecturer. It was in the upstairs room of a pub in Bath where we lived then, and the setting could not look safer or cozier. Bath as a city makes a living out of safe and cozy, as well as quirky and quaint. And as is to be expected, the quaint doesn't fall away even as you're talking about violence. Slow, I said to Paul, the lecturer, because he kept repeating on me. Slow next to violence immediately seemed to have a mitigating effect on the violence. It morphed it. It turned it into an oxymoron. The next time I saw Paul, he lent me the book he'd been referencing, Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor by Rob Nixon. It's about how the rich wreak havoc on the poor by the methods through which they got rich. The mainstream media generally tells stories of violence as sudden events that cause immediate pain. There is a cut with the goo and the spillage. If public attention doesn't stick around long enough to witness what comes after the blood has been wiped off the streets, then what about suffering delayed by many decades? Slow violence, I read, occurs gradually and out of sight. This harm is typically not viewed as violence at all. The perpetrator has left the scene. In fact, they may never have physically been on the scene at all.
Wow, that was so powerful. Yeah, I don't know if we wanted to just take a second to reflect on that. Or would you like to do your reading next, Yara?
Yeah, that was wicked. And it made me think actually about air pollution and the Silvertown Tunnel, because that's invisible and it happens all the time. Shall I read?
Yeah,
Yeah?
I think that would be good, and then we can just get
Okay,
into the discussion.
let's do it.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to read a paragraph from page 11, and then I'm going to read page 405. And yeah, these are both passages about London. Wait, I've just lost the. Okay, sorry. Yeah. I'll explain why I did that later. So. It was the year that Prince died, and the guy who played Professor Snape died. It was the year that George Michael died at Christmas, and bright flowers and handwritten notes and laminated photos of him piled up outside his Highgate mansion in the frost. Ever since that winter, everywhere you go in London, you can hear the buskers playing Careless Whisper on their saxophones. They play it at the fullest volume. They play it after dark, into the dark. They play it to tourists in Covent Garden, at the bottom of the mosaic escalators at Tottenham Court Road Tube, on the crowded pavement outside Brixton Station. They play it on summer's nights into the night, into the smell of bin bags. Ba-na-na-na, ba-na-na, ba-na-na-na-na-na-na, na-na-na-na. The older-looking man outside Mile End Station plays despite the rain, his body bent into the worn-out instrument. "7 days after the election, Melissa sat in the kitchen/living room in the early morning. Her laptop was open in front of her. She watched the shaky footage taken on a mobile phone in the early morning on a street between Ladbroke Grove and Notting Hill. She watched the fire burn and spread across the face and body of Grenfell Tower. She watched live on the BBC as smoke, still thick and living pushed into the sky from 100-bedroom windows. A news presenter with a certain kind of voice asked a man with a certain other kind of voice how he had escaped the building with his family. A news presenter spoke to someone who had woken up, A news presenter spoke to someone who had been woken up by the screams, although she lived 3 streets away. A news presenter spoke to a man in a sour kameez from the local mosque who was giving out meals and blankets. A news presenter spoke to a man in glasses from the residents' fire safety committee who said that they had told the council it was unsafe many times. A news presenter spoke to a man who said there were still people inside. A news presenter spoke to a local celebrity who had come from the tall white houses to say, "Where is the government? How did this happen?" A news presenter spoke to someone from the London Fire Brigade who said that the building was 67 metres high, but they could only reach as high as 32 metres with the hose and the platform that they had. A news presenter said that the stay-put policy meant official advice had been for residents not to leave their flats in the case of a fire. Official advice had been, wait to be saved. Behind him, the building was still burning. The list of the missing was long, and of the names that were known, most were not English. Katrina's relatives kept messaging her to ask if she was okay. At work, Melissa couldn't concentrate. It hurt her in the west part of her body. Mark wouldn't stop talking. Femi sat with his long legs bent, his knees against his chest.
Wow, thank you.
Just read one of my favourite lines from the entire book. It hurt her in the west part of her body. I love that.
Did you want to explain why you chose those two passages?
Yeah, I think because I knew the second one would be quite sad, so I wanted to have a joyful one in there too. And I know that relates to like part of how we're gonna talk about writing about difficult things. So wanted the vibe to be what both those things, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, thank you so much both for doing your readings. Jessica, you've written a collection of essays on crisis and response, some of which covers the pandemic and the climate crisis, 2 global events that feel unstoppable and had disproportionately affected and still do the most vulnerable people on this planet. How important is intersectionality to your writing and in telling these stories?
Yeah, so I think it's really key. But the way I think like the way the collection came about was about trying to figure out, like I was talking about that first essay, and it was just me trying to figure out how come I am responding in this way. What is it about my upbringing? What is it about my experiences? What is it about like the world around me and the narratives around me that are making me respond in this way? And that when you start looking at it that way, and when you start kind of pulling on those threads, then you start seeing just like the multiplicity of identity, and also the way that all those things are interconnected. So that's sort of what kind of gave rise to like the rest of the collection, I think. And and there's another one of the essays which is about pilots, and it's like I talked to 2 pilots and 1 aircraft engineer who are all now climate activists. And what I really realized speaking to them was that there's just so much of this like fear-based response leads to just tunnel vision. And one of the things that happens is that you kind of stop seeing issues as multiple, and you stop seeing people as multiple. It's just this kind of like tunneling in on one thing because you're sort of terrified. And I think a lot of the like the work, I guess, that we need to do is to sort of resist that, I suppose. So for me, like, and in the book, that intersectionality in terms of response and in terms of in terms of activism is really tightly linked to reminding ourselves constantly that we are many things and everyone is many things. And like you see it all the time, that kind of that urge to just like simplify people, even in like Rishi Sunak, hurrah! It's like people are many things at the same time. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Great example.
Yeah.
Very topical. Well, the essays cover such a wide range of themes, from moose live streams to interviews with pilots and your experience with naturalization. How did you pick such stories, and what do you think connects them?
Well, I mean, I think they came from that first one, actually, and more like I think all of them are sort of necessary, because I needed to figure out how I could make sense in activism. like they're quite sort of functional in that way, because I needed to do a lot of thinking around what my position is in terms of vulnerabilities and privileges, to be able to do meaningful work. And that's like a continuous process that we all have to do. But I think that's really key to all of the essays, actually. And then the whole idea of the nerves sort of came with that, because I realized that it was like it was all rooted in feeling, and why we are feeling certain things, and why some of us haven't felt it for hundreds of years, whereas a lot of people have, and how how we can feel more in some sense, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Here's to feeling more.
Yeah.
Yara, though your work is a book of fiction, I felt like it drew from very realistic conversations in the post-Brexit years, as well as during the military dictatorship years in Brazil. How did you approach intersectionality in your work?
So I guess I have been aware of intersectionality as a concept for since I was in my early 20s. And when I was writing my first book, I was thinking a lot about intersecting identities and I guess class and gender and race and migration all together, in terms of how does it make sense to be in this body, in this place, in this time. And thinking about being British and Brazilian and also like, I guess, like middle class or relatively wealthy. And those are the things that character was exploring, and then also hypersexualization. So I was thinking very much in terms of how this one person experiences the world and is embodied, and their material conditions and circumstances. But with this book, I guess Bolsonaro was elected, and he was elected by 60% if you just look at the votes cast in the Brazilian consulate in the UK. So I really fell out of love with my Brazilian identity, I think, and obviously the UK as well. So I was thinking, I suppose, about material conditions that people experience, and solidarity, and chosen family, and liberation, but less in terms of like what identity the characters may or may not have, or how that sits with them, but what they would want to create instead, and what liberation looks like. So maybe it doesn't sound like a huge shift, but I think it was helpful to take that information about how these people were embodied and experienced the world, and instead of just being able to sort of name it and understand it, be like, oh, and this is why it's trash, and we want something else. So with this book, I guess I was wanting to really focus on that idea of like expanding the political horizon, and like what does it mean to have grown up in the 90s being told like, oh, the Berlin Wall's fallen down, USSR doesn't exist anymore, like there's just centre left and centre right, and things can only get better, and and like that, in Brazil we had a more left-wing centre left government, and then we had New Labour here, and just sort of told like, oh, things are just slowly going to get better forever, and this is how it's going to be. And then suddenly like things get much worse, and like fascism's on the rise, and you realize, oh, neoliberalism was actually super fucked. And I wanted to kind of reach back to the military dictatorship in Brazil, but more broadly, like the kind of 1960s and 70s revolutionary movements in the global south, and be like, look, there's so much more that we can ask for than just like a bit less austerity. Within living memory, people were like making revolutions so successfully that dictatorships were established to stop them. So, and in doing that, I guess I took an intersectional approach. So, for example, it's like really nerdy, and I could nerd out about it for ages. But like the Brazilian left wing movements that I was like trying to research from the UK during the pandemic, like they're not necessarily spoken about in terms of like the identities of the people involved. So there's like a film that's recently come out called Marighella about this Brazilian communist leader in the 60s, and they cast like a very famous black actor for it, and everyone was like, why have you cast a black guy? And it's like, because this famous communist leader in Brazil was black, like, but nobody knows because it's talked about as like left-wing history or whatever. So and I was reading the diaries of it's like a really interesting document. It's like this, so there was at one point in the late 60s, early 70s, this like group of communists that went to start a liberated zone in the forest, but they were like, it's like if we like picked up Kalashnikovs and were like, let's go. Like they were not ready for what was about to happen to them. Like and like absolutely not. Like I can't express how like it was very dangerous, and they were all massacred, but like by the government. But like for a few years they were there trying to build this liberated zone, and there's this diary of this commander there, and it was seized by the military dictatorship when they massacred them, but it was leaked by a journalist in 2011. And there's things in it like, oh, we've all got diarrhea today because we've been drinking cashew milk and none of us are used to it, or like, this is how we've befriended the people who live here locally, like, because they were all mostly university educated, whereas the people that lived in this town were like much poorer people who were probably black and brown and moved there when slavery was abolished. But that's not in there necessarily. So I was trying to work out like what's going on class-wise, what's going on race-wise, like who's having sex with who, and like then I, and like, are they shagging? Like, can you be queer? Like, I don't know. And anyway, but then I found this one bit which was like, he says, oh, a local Tereco priest has written this prayer for us. And I was like, what's Tereco? So I looked it up, and it's an Afro-Brazilian religion. And I was like, all right, so now I've established that the people who lived locally were black or had Afro-Brazilian religion, and also really liked the guerrillas because they made this prayer for them, and they used to have parties together. And so that was a really interesting piecing together, using that approach of being like, oh, they did not necessarily record themselves as like with their identities or whatever. Anyways, so yeah, really, it was very like nerdy, and I enjoyed it. But I realized I'm very used to saying, and then they all got massacred, but I could see the horror on your face because it's quite upsetting. But yeah, anyway, so yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that. And so much of what you both write about is rooted in love and hope. Your writing styles are also very sensory. I love that, and I could really imagine what you were describing. Where do you both draw inspiration from to write in such an honest and raw way? Maybe Jessica, to you.
Oh God, that's a really weirdly difficult question, actually.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, so I guess there are a couple of things that I could say. One of them being that I'd never written essays before. So that was like, it was really new to me. And when something is, I mean, I find this with writing in general, that hardly ever know what I'm doing. But especially there are all these things that you think it should be, basically, because it's a new genre, and then you kind of go and you read, and I feel like a lot of the it was important for me to ground it in personal experience, because it was so much about positioning and so much about being honest, and so then I was like, okay, well, these are personal essays, I suppose. But a lot of the personal essays that I was reading were really internal, or to me felt really internal, and it felt like the politics were almost a matter of interpretation. And the kind of more traditional, the personal is political, as in like merely by, it doesn't have to be mentioned. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to constantly like push outwards and be able to name it and go, okay, well, what does this say about someone else's experience? Or how does this take us somewhere slightly new collectively? So because of that, I kind of needed to look elsewhere. And that was really interesting, because then I kind of ended up reading a lot of like journalism, but also poetry, and there were things there that sort of allowed me to be explicitly political, I guess. But the question about, was it honesty? Yeah. There were a few things in there, but
honesty, love, hope.
I think it's just because, like, as opposed to when I wrote the novel, it felt like it was very. I mean, it's interesting because some people have sort of asked, like, why is it nonfiction rather than fiction? And for me, it would have felt like writing this as fiction would have felt like taking the kind of long way around. And it's weird how that happens, because sometimes fiction can be more direct than nonfiction. But for this, it felt like I already know what this is in the world, and I already know where this is happening, and I already know what the questions are. So I need to write it as honestly as possible. And because it's connected to activism as well, and kind of being in rooms with people, then honesty becomes even more important, because I need to kind of sit in rooms with people and like be able to do that work and meet someone and know kind of what I'm bringing, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a very long
No, thank you. Just to repeat the question for you, just in case you've forgotten. I mean, you write with such love, or you write about love and hope, and your work is very much rooted in that. Where do you draw inspiration to write about it in such a way that feels really raw and honest?
So I think in terms of raw, I guess just a general rule I have when I'm writing is like I try to just describe, this is so basic, like what's going on with the five senses, and like rather than say like she was afraid, be like, oh, what's happening in her body. Like that's just how I try to approach it, to make it feel embodied when you're reading. But in terms of honesty, like one of my favorite writers is Jane Austen. Like she's not a radical, obviously, but but what she will always tell you is like the material conditions and like who makes what, who's got housing, and like what's at stake. Like you always know that about everyone in the room. Like in a Jane Austen book, like as soon as Mr. Darcy's introduced, you're like, all right, that's how rich he is, and that's why everyone thinks he's hot. Like that's his vibe. Like you know immediately. Like why is Mrs. Bennet so annoying? It's like she's really scared of being poor. Like okay, like fair enough. Like is she hysterical, or is she just like actually reacting quite a rational way? So in terms of honesty, it was really important for me to like communicate like how much the rent of the flat is, and like show material conditions really clearly of the characters. And like me and my editor had this conversation. She was like, "Oh, I don't think this extra flatmate's adding anything," and I was like, "But they wouldn't be able to afford a flat with only 3 people." So we just had to write her as like always at her boyfriend's house or something. But like, but it was because I didn't want to write this false thing, which would be that this character could afford to not live with this many other people in a house that was any bigger than it was. So I think like that was a really important part of the honesty, is that I wanted it to be a book about like the material conditions of these people. And I suppose in terms of love, I was really keen on showing like moments of small utopia in order to gesture at the possibility of a bigger one. You know, like the reason that we know life doesn't have to be super shit all the time is because sometimes it's amazing. And like we just have a sense like, oh, okay, if it can be this good, like why is it so often not? And I wanted to write about like there's this like Anne Boyer phrase that she used, I think, quite flippantly in an interview, but it's like, I love about how falling in love can create like a little communism of two between two people in a couple. And that made me think of not just romantic couples, but also, you know, friends like smokers that share tobacco and no one's counting like who's owes who, and like meals with friends. And, you know, like we do have these communisms of however many in our chosen family. So, yeah, I wanted to write about those safe, loving moments of small communisms to make us think about like what if we had a big one, I guess. And yeah, there's this queer theorist called Jose Esteban Munoz who talks about queer utopia, and queerness is on the horizon. And I actually only read that after I finished writing, but then I was like, oh yeah, you know, this guy gets it. So I really recommend that. And he talks about like feeling astonishment and awe, and like when you're at the club, and how that's how we know like something else is possible. So yeah.
Amazing, thank you.
I just thought of someone else. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
which I just, it's such an amazing book that I kind of wanted to mention it because it's something else that was kind of really, I was already writing the book, but one of the issues that I have with writing is that I find it really difficult to like to not span out, to like to focus, basically, is another word for it. Like you know, the whole like, oh, this is the story. I sort of don't get that. And when I was writing the essays, at one point I came across a book called The Memory We Could Be by Daniel Macmillan Bosco-Boynick, which came out like not that long ago. It's like a few years ago. And it basically is the book that I recommend to anyone who kind of wants to understand more about why the climate crisis came from colonialism. Like he basically just goes back all the way and just like, this is what happened, this is why we're here, and in order to create a new history, we need to sort of reframe the narrative that is everywhere, sort of thing. And that was so inspiring because it made it okay to have the connections be the story, rather than be like, this is your niche, this is your focus.
Thank you so much for that recommendation. I actually was thinking of what book to do next for a new climate book club I've just started. So that sounds great because we're doing colonialism at the moment. Yeah, actually, if we're giving recommendations, something I also really enjoyed at the beginning of the year, I think it was the first book I read, was Lola Olufemi's Experiments Imagining Otherwise. It just really kind of, took me to another place and just made me think, oh my God, hope. I forgot what this feels like. And then also, you know, I think maybe I read it before or after, quite shortly, before or after your book, Yara, and I felt really pumped after that. And, you know, obviously sitting here with both of you, I've been thinking about both of your work and kind of comparing it as well, like an English lit student. I wasn't even an English lit student. I don't know why I said that. But something that I noticed is that you both really love playing with form. And I was wondering what dimension you hope for this to add to the impact of your writing.
So one thing that I think anything that is written unconventionally does is it draws your attention to what you were expecting. So it makes you notice that there are conventions and there are ways that you expect a novel or a set of essays to be. And once you start noticing it, it invites you, I suppose, to like question and reinvent those conventions and understand like why they exist. So I think that is subversive and cool and important. And also, what it also does or can do is, because it draws your attention to the fact that, or at least the way I do it, I guess I'm trying to draw attention to the fact that like this is a text put together of many other bits and pieces. Like it's a kind of DIY thing. It's very aware of its own materiality, kind of like a zine. Like there's nothing more aware of its materiality than a zine. And by which I mean it draws attention to the fact that it's a physical object in your hand, whether that's an ebook or a real book. And by acknowledging its own materiality, it draws attention and makes you acknowledge like the means of production, that it was put together by workers. It didn't just like magically appear in your lap, which is the kind of fancy we have about novels, that they're somehow transmitted from the author's head directly to the reader's head, which isn't true, right? Like a private Word document doesn't like magically become a book. There are many workers involved, and you have to. There's usually a point where the private Word document becomes a commodity for sale, and there are people making decisions about what it looks like and who sells it and how it's sold and all of these different things. So I guess that to me is really important, that drawing attention to the means of production and distribution. We are in a bookshop, and like all of those things. It helps us like ground the novel in the real world and understand that it's not just an abstract thing. Yes.
Well, while we're just talking with you, Yara, I also wanted to ask, one of the things that really stood out to me in your book is when you asked the reader to play the songs out loud from the page out loud, and also speak out loud and chant with the protesters. Why was that important to you, that the book is a multi-sensory experience and not just sort of reading in your head?
No, exactly. It's a continuation of the answer that I started. So yeah, it asks you to, when music's playing, play it out loud with the people in the book, and when they're chanting, to chant with them, because they go to various activist meetings that are modelled off a mixture of LGSM, Lesbian and Gay Support the Migrants, and Sisters Uncut. And the reason I did that is to connect the world of the novel to the real world that you're in. Like when music is playing, then you start moving your body, you start being aware of your body in space. Like, can I dance where I am? And if you are to start chanting, you'll be like, can I talk now? Am I on the tube? Like, is this all good? So like, it's really very much about making sure that it'll try to encourage the reader to understand the world of the novel as the real world that they're in, and discourage this idea of like, oh, I'm going to step into and out of the world of the novel, and once I've closed this novel, I'm just going to carry on with my life as usual. I've had my little catharsis. Like, I've maybe felt a bit sorry for some people in a different part of the world, and now I'm carrying on. Instead, I want it to be like, sort of be agitating and create desire, and very much not be a cathartic experience, or one that finishes with the final word of the book.
Thank you. And Jessica, what considerations do you take when thinking about form, especially with this book?
This one, yeah, I mean, because you were talking about expectations that a reader brings with them, and I think one of the things that I kind of really want to resist in whatever I write is sort of easy comfort. And that sounds like I want to make someone uncomfortable, which I don't want to. I think it's more about text with a multiplicity of voices. There's space for the reader, basically, and it doesn't come across as like a finished thing. I think it's about bringing in the reader and making them a part of what is happening in that meeting. And with this book specifically, I think it was a lot about, because so much about it is to do with that gap between the private and the public, and private and public crises or crises. And so, like, one of the examples in the book, I guess, is in between each essay, there's like a thing. I just like, some people call them poems. Like, I don't really know if they're poems. We with my editor who's there, we started calling them the nerves. So we were like, like, a nerve here would be good, or like move this nerve around. And I think so. And where they came from was because at one point when I was writing an essay, it became quite intellectual for me. And I realized that it was so like, I was so focused on what am I trying to say here, that I sort of had to go back to feeling. more. And so I started reading poetry that I read when I was like in my early 20s in Swedish. And there was something so like immediate about that. So for a while, those nerves were like the only thing that I could write. Um, and and it's interesting as well because I think it does reflect on it ties into another kind of discussion in the book, and something that I've been thinking a lot about after finishing it, which is the kind of pathologizing of feeling, I guess, and the way we talk about mental health, as as if it were in any way like not a natural reaction to be anxious in this world, like no wonder. But it's all about kind of siloing that off. And I think to some extent that is to do with the anxieties around being vulnerable and the anxieties around what is private and what you should keep to yourself and what is okay to talk about in public and what is okay to be like public and political discourse. So yeah, I think that that is another way in which those things can kind of be bridged a bit. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, just to take us back to, I guess, the topic of intersectionality, I know that both of you engage in activism outside of your writing, or maybe you think your writing is your activism. How do you think these experiences inform what you write about and the way you see the world? Big question.
I can start.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting you said, or maybe you think your writing is your activism. No, not at all. I've been sort of writing quite a bit about this and thinking a lot about it since I finished the book. And I work for part-time for a radical bookshop in Edinburgh, and even in that space, I've sort of started thinking a lot about what do we mean when we say that books are change making, or that they change lives, or that they are somehow a force for good. I'm really skeptical about all those things, and I think partly I think it comes from thinking about climate specifically. That I think at one point I started to look at the way that that literature was engaging with the climate crisis, and especially in the Anglophone world and in kind of Western literature, it's a lot about looking at the future. It's not about looking at history at all. So that's a problem in itself, because if you read something that is meant to be about your future, even though it's harrowing, there's this sense of like, well, at least we're not there yet. And what kind of excuses does that make possible? And the other thing is sort of going back to what you were saying about like means of production. If you're seeing books as inherently good, then you don't have to question the way that they are made, or the inequalities in the industry, or the exploitations in the industry, all those things. So the way that I kind of think about it is more like I write to figure things out. But it's more about figuring out what comes next. It's like the actual activism happens in rooms with people. That's not what you asked about at all.
No. That was really interesting.
But yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
I do agree. I think also like being a journalist, obviously I write a lot about climate related stories as of late, but other things as well, other social justice issues, and that's not activism. That's just writing. That's just doing my job and being paid for it. But I personally believe that activism is doing the stuff that happens outside.
I think it has a role. Like I think it can spark things and tweak mindsets and bring something. But the question is like, what happens?
I see it as like more the comms leg of what actually happens, basically.
Yeah, we're just the propaganda working group over here. Yeah, I agree. I think like I write because like I love writing, and I try and do like I've tried to make my writing as revolutionary as possible, but that's a belief that I have. Like I just hope that is what it does in the world. I have like really have no idea. Like And if I were to try and use my time as efficiently as possible, like I wouldn't spend it writing novels, like in service of the revolution. I don't think that's the most urgent task, but like, but it's also a gesture towards like, I don't know. I think it was Marx who was like, in the future there won't be professional painters. There'll just be like people who paint as well as other things they do. So it's also a gesture towards the world where like hopefully we all do lovely creative things all the time. But yeah, probably like the most useful thing you can do as a writer is like unionize other writers or something like that. Not necessarily write novels. But going back to like the activism and how it informs it, yeah, a lot of but I suppose the reason I write about activism specifically is because like that's a lot of what I found interesting to do and moving to do and life-changing in my early 20s was like how incredible it was to go into a room like at Sisters Uncut and be like, oh my god, what the fuck, and then like all work together to do a thing that's like in the news. So you feel so suddenly like, because you're doing this thing together, very, very powerful. And it was very, for me, like entering the workforce at the same time as starting activism, I was like, oh, you could put these same people in like a hierarchical, ununionized, exploitative workplace and they would be like total bitches to each other because like it's not actually about like whether you're a good person, it's about what the environment is, what you've decided to do in that space. Yeah, but I also wanted to touch on like, because when I feel like recently, like when what I really loved about The Nerves was lots of different things, but I really liked how it spoke to the experience of like being a climate activist, but also a person of color, and also like someone with connections around the world, and someone that does like want to fly and go see your family, but also like is thinking about your individual impact, but also knows that it's not up to you as an individual. And like, I really like that it was all of these different things together, and not trying to pretend that, not trying to be like one of these dudes on Twitter that like pretends that they don't have those feelings, they just have analysis. And like, when like the soup thing happened, like I was DMing both of you and we were all talking to each other.
Soup discourse.
Yeah, like when the soup
I was waiting for the soup to be.
yeah, and that's part of why I really wanted to talk to both of you, because I really like relate to how we're all like trying to make stuff in our writing but also outside of our writing, and navigate like the climate movement, which is really annoying but really important, I guess. It's not to be super reductionist about it, but and I think people often think like, I don't know, I'm completely rambling, but see the climate movement as like, oh, it's all just annoying middle class bros or hippies or something. And I just want to say to them like, oh my god, like read Jessica's book, like shut up. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And go and join and support the people that are doing that work rather than going off.
Oh yeah, I mean that kind of reaction is just like so, and I think I said this to you at some point, that like there has been this media narrative about climate organizing being all white, and it's like that in itself is also like you're erasing people. Like, what about the people of color that are not only the people of color that are like in this country doing it, but also like the people in the majority world who have been like working for climate justice for decades and decades. And it just, again, it's that kind of sort of easy narrative, because it's much easier to just have a story that you stick to. And I think that's like, it's safe. Because it's much more difficult to like stay vulnerable to changing your mind, basically, or appear as if you have changed your mind.
Yeah, totally agree. And I like that both of your books sort of either have characters or the central character who you don't claim to know it all, because no one knows it all, and also we don't know what's going to make things work, and all we can do is just put our heads together and like kind of try our best. And I remember when the soup thing happened and then the milk thing happened.
Should we explain what the soup thing is?
Oh, sorry, yes. So in the last few weeks in the UK, Just Stop Oil protesters have been basically
Sorry.
doing some really great actions. One included 2 people throwing a can of tomato soup on Van Gogh's sunflowers in the National Gallery, and the painting was protected in glass. That's a pretty important note. And then I think XR's Animal Rebellion poured like quite a lot of milk out in like very expensive shops across the UK, and kind of made a statement about, you know, being anti-dairy industry and how that contributes to the climate crisis. And then also Just Stop Oil have been spraying every building, not every, targeting, not every building, but targeting the important buildings, like luxury car companies, and like
the Scotland Yard, the Met.
Scotland Yard, yeah, that was about to say that as well. And then 2 protesters stopped the Dartford Bridge for 36 hours, and they climbed up it and basically like were in little hammocks. So anyways, there's been a lot of action and protest, and I guess that invites so much, I guess, criticism from people into what is the best way of fighting the climate crisis. And yeah, I did immediately text Yara, because I was like, Yara, I'm pro-soup but anti-milk. I don't know where I stand on this, but I'm obviously, you know, like, yeah, people try things, and sometimes I thought maybe the comms on that wasn't like super straightforward in a cost of living crisis, but you know, actually, someone from XR Animal Rebellion emailed me and said if I wanted to chat with them to just talk about the action, which is really great. Because then it's like, wow, inviting conversation, and yeah, just being kind of like happy to talk together about stuff like that. Yeah.
I mean, one thing about the soup action, sorry, I just stuck so short, because you were talking about how like writing influences activism and kind of vice versa. One thing that I thought when I watched that happen was that some people were so affronted by it because they saw it as an act of violence against something beautiful, something valuable. And it was like right there. And the issue with a lot of climate violence is that there is no perpetrator. It's like it was really easy to just go, these 2 young people, and just be like, oh my God, you're doing the wrong thing. Because there's somebody there, right? There's like a beautiful thing and they're like throwing soup on it. But like, so I think a lot of the work is how do you make, you know, the suits that are making however many billions Shell just made in that quarter, how do you make it clear that they are the perpetrators?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we're kind of actually running out of time, even though I have lots more questions to ask, but I'm sure we can continue later. But I thought I would kind of go to the audience and ask if there are any questions there. If not, I can continue.
There are no stupid questions. Any questions are good.
Well, how about I'll ask one more question and you think about it? All right. Well, okay, actually, yeah, I want to talk about this. I find that it can be quite difficult to write about the world when you see so much destruction. So much of my work as a journalist has to do with essentially documenting a large-scale collapse, especially when I'm, at gal-dem, we like really try to get stories about climate justice and injustice across the world. So, yeah, I was wondering whether you find this difficult too, and whether that comes across in your work, and do you try to counteract that with positivity and sort of beautiful things, and do you think that's important too?
Yeah, I think it is probably. Like, I think I don't have like the hardest life ever in the world, but like often find things really shit. I think I would, no matter like what I spent, like even if I don't know, had a job that like meant I only encountered like puppies or something like that, I think I probably like still feel that way. So yeah, I think it is really important to like spend a lot of time doing nice things with your friends and family, if you like them, or chosen family, and I think in lockdown, like I really learned to do that with my best friend. Like we had a lot of like planned activities to like force things to not be terrible. And similarly, like sometimes I don't feel guilty if I'm just not going to read the news or engage with it for a little bit. I think that's okay and actually important because you have to like survive and enjoy your time on planet Earth. And I think it gets quite complicated when you do work that can be like potentially traumatizing, and in order to create a product that you sell, whether that's like an article or a book. So I guess like when that's happening, try and do it as much as possible on my own terms, and be like, oh well, yeah, I just spent a day writing a passage about Grenfell. Like I'm gonna plan myself a really good evening where I'm relaxing and like not encountering anything horrible. Yeah.
I think your book is so joyful. Like it really, really is. And yeah, and that is something like that there's a few writers that I really admire who like you, one of them, who sort of the joy is there, because I think again it's like what happens next. We have these analyses, but like how it's such a radical act to dare to imagine what could be and to kind of harness that energy. I guess my answer is like really twee. Because it's like one of those words I'm really allergic to, but also I actually think it's true, and it's like the word is gratitude. But I wish there was another word because it is really twee. But it is a feeling that like that is energizing, because it gives you a kind of, when the ground is falling, it gives you something to stand on. And so like I'm really grateful for people who appear in the book and people I've met through activism and just people in my life, and I think that is one of the like the places to go to, because it keeps you from falling.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're both taking care of yourself. It's very important. It is. Oh my gosh, it's now turning into a wellness podcast. And we'll be selling journals upstairs, wellness journals, 3 gratitudes. Any questions in the audience?
Yeah, I have a question. Yara, it's actually about your book and a relationship in that book, and you're talking about intersectionality, but and you mentioned kind of the word queerness earlier on in the talk, and it's the relationship between Laura and, I'm gonna mispronounce the name because I can't quite remember, but Killer of Kings.
Yeah.
And what is that grounded in? Anything that you found historically? Because I know in like Latina culture, those kind of queer relationships at that time, it's not something that's easily accessible through kind of literature. I'd love to understand where that what inspired that relationship.
Yes.
Can I
Yes.
try to repeat that?
Yes.
Wait, do you?
Yes, I'll repeat. I'll
Yes,
summarize.
yes.
So, for context, so this is a question about the relationship between 2 characters in the novel, and a part of the novel is set during the Brazilian military dictatorship, and there are these 2 characters, Clytemnestra, Killer of Kings, who insists on having this ancient Greek name, and Lauda, the famous revolutionary, who's the daughter of this politician, and it's been alleged that she shot a military police guy, and they go on this sort of like road trip, I guess, together through Brazil. So yeah, I was thinking. Oh, and the question was about like queer relationships at that time and why I why I put that together and what I was thinking about. Okay, you're nodding, so I've like done a good job of summarizing it. So yes, I was thinking a lot about, so when I started looking at the military dictatorship and that kind of time, I was like, wow, like a lot of the stories are of like upper class white people, and like they put their lives on the line, like that was real. And then I was like, but this was like socialist revolutionary uprising, like it wasn't just upper middle class white people that were involved. And so there's this very big document, the Truth Commission report, which was produced in Brazil in 2014, which looks into state violence under the military dictatorship. And it has a sort of, I don't know if it's even explicitly intersectional, but it has this intersectional approach where it's like looking at the different groups, like students, indigenous people, trade unionists, who are targeted differently by the dictatorship. And so I was looking at that, and like I said before, I was trying to be like, okay, well, like, where are the black people? Like, how is this fitting into this? Like, I know they were there, like, and I was looking at different bits of things like that Diyora referred to, the Truth Commission. There are various oral histories that I was reading, and I was thinking, like, what would it have been like to be a queer woman in this time? And Clytemnestra comes from a really like poor working class background, and part of how I wrote her story was because, you know, the reason that a lot of the stories of working class people who resisted the dictatorship haven't been preserved is because like they didn't go on to be academics. Like they were just blacklisted trade unionists that were really couldn't get a job. Like they were not writing memoirs, they were trying to survive. So I wanted to kind of represent that experience a bit. And then when I was thinking about what it would have been like to be a queer woman in that time, I did a lot of interviewing my mum about her experience of she was a student, like an upper class white student in the resistance movement in São Paulo. So it wasn't her experience, but she shared with me, she was part of a militant group, and it was very hierarchical, and she recruited her friend Paulinho, and they did organizing together in working class parts of São Paulo. And then Paulinho was gay, and Paulinho, there was a message from the higher ups that my mom was told to pass on to Paulinho, and it was like, oh, you know, it's fine that you're gay, but you can't do stuff with the people. You can only do stuff like you can write newspaper articles or stuff, you know, because you can't be queer in front of the people, like as if they're not working class queer people or whatever. And so my mum has to tell this to Paulinho, and they're in her car, and then so she says it to Paulinho, and then she's immediately sick, like she knows she's done something like really awful, and then they both leave the movement after that. So I guess I was creating fiction, but based on the knowledge that like you could not be queer really in the movement. But what if I wanted to create a story about these two queer women that wasn't just about like discrimination, but was actually about freedom and love, and like not to look back at those movements and be like they were perfect, but instead to be like, can I, using Saidiya Hartman's term, like fabulation, like can I fabulate like this 100 pages of freedom for them? So that was what I wanted to do, and I wanted it to feel a little different in texture to the rest of the novel, like a little bit magical and not quite real, so as not to give the impression that it was how things were, that it was a sort of a gift rather than a history. So great question, thank you.
Wow, I'm so inspired by both of you. I'm gonna go home and cry. No. Any more questions from the audience?
I had one, because you both work on such complex topics. How do you begin to start writing something without trying to reduce it and simplifying it and having a narrative at the beginning and end, but staying within the complexity at the same time?
Okay, I'm going to try and repeat that question. Because you both work on such complex topics, how do you begin to write without reducing things down to a single narrative? Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's such a difficult question, because like I kind of want to say like obviously some things happen, like it's there, but I don't know if like, yeah, you kind of feel like, is it a book, you know? I think for me it's like the other way around. It's really difficult not to hone it down. Like I really struggle honing things down and being being focused. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, it doesn't not an answer at all. Yeah, but yeah, in terms of like, I think what things are about, it is the result of a lot of just like rewriting and reworking and being open to questions, changing, and being open to, again, like having your own mind change and not being like, because there's a safety in sort of deciding what something is and then sticking with it. And so being open to things changing and is like a big part of it.
I agree with you. I think like it's very difficult to like hone down the chaos into something that like is hopefully like punchy and clear in some level. And this is probably like a mega cliche, but like I think it was like Anna Burns. I'm like a full like Milkman mega fan. Like Anna Burns, I think she was saying that there are like two kinds of writers: the one that like start with loads of chaos and then like pick at it until it makes sense, which is what she said she was, unsurprisingly. And then there are writers that start with like something very simple and then build out. And I do think most of the time I'm probably the first one. But I also think like it's very important to me, like every time I write the book, to have a kind of theory of the book and what it's doing and like why I've made every choice and what I hope that it's doing and what is the point of it, and justifying it as a text, and also explaining it. And I guess that is my way of working through turning the chaos into something like meaningful and clear, but also similarly like making sure none of it is like making a point at the expense of the writing either. So there was a lot of having to become really comfortable writing outside of my experience and identity. And when I do that, I couldn't just be like, well, I've written this ironic thing or funny thing or making fun of this bit or showing something painful, like, because it is that way. I really had to be like, well, why have I shown that? Like, am I being trite? Am I like cheapening someone's experience? Like, am I creating like poverty porn or whatever? Like, so, and I think actually that was really rigorous and good. Yeah.
I think that kind of relates to personal essays in one way as well, because I sort of found that I didn't want to write anything personal that didn't everything personal is there for a reason, and it's there to ask a question, a wider question, because otherwise I think anything that's like memoirs, like, well, you could just like write anything about your life and just put it in there, but didn't want to do that. That's not what this is. So that is like a rigorous kind of process as well.
Yeah, and I think your book feels really like generous rather than self-indulgent for that reason.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's very lovely.
Yeah. Any final questions? No, maybe we can round things off. I guess I want to say a massive thank you to both of you for coming here tonight and having this conversation. And it's also a conversation I think we've had off stage. Well, we're not on a stage, but yeah. So thank you for having it again, and can't wait to. I don't know what to say. I was like, can't wait to read more stuff from you, but then that's like putting pressure on you to produce more stuff. Can't wait to reread your books.
Yay. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
If you would like to buy either book, please head to our website pagesofhackney.co.uk, where you can buy it for collection from the bookshop or delivery nationwide. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe wherever you find your podcasts for more literary events like this one.